Honorable Provisor Sir, Mumbai University. Kulkarni Sir, Vishwa Bharati University Vice Chancellor Sir आलेले आहेत sir. Vidyut Chakrabarti sir. He is present here.
Professor Chakrabarti join. Arekar sir, am I audible?
Yes sir, you are audible sir.
Professor Chakrabarti
audible.
Yes sir.
Hearty welcome sir.
Yes, happy welcome. Thank you.
Sir, namaste sir.
Namaskar, Nitin ji, namaskar.
It appears to be cold in Kolkata.
It is very cold. It is now, I think, 6 degrees. Very cold. So, since I'm inside, so probably, I feel less chilly. But outside, it's terrible.
Yes, sir.
It's a gaon, basically. It's a village. Unlike Mumbai, it's a village.
Correct.
So, village, the cold, cold will be little harsher than what you experience in like Bombay or Delhi. But Delhi is pretty bad, I'm told. Delhi is pretty bad.
Yes, sir. Sir, it's already 4:01. With your kind permission, shall we start, sir?
Please.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, everyone. This is Dr. Nitin Arekar welcoming you all for the valedictory function of the 2 days national conference on role and contribution of students and youth movements in nation building during pre and post independence era, organized by the Professor Bal Apte Center for Studies in Students and Youth Movements. May I request everyone to kindly rise for the national anthem? Bharat Mata Ki Jai. Thank you, everyone. 2 days of deliberations were on this Zoom platform in the 2 days national conference organized by the Professor Bal Apte Center for Studies in Students and Youth Movements. Really, it was very hectic but very healthy 2 days for every one of us. 3 plenary sessions, 1 guest lecture, paper presentations by the delegates, nearly 24-25 papers were presented. And now we are here for the valedictory function. The chief guest of the valedictory function, Professor Vidyut Chakrabarti, Vice Chancellor, Vishwa Bharati University, Shantiniketan, West Bengal, is with us, and Professor Ravindra Kulkarni, the Pro Vice Chancellor of Mumbai University, is presiding over this particular function. On behalf of we all, may I request Mr. Devendra Pai to present the report of the 2 days deliberations. Mr. Devendra Pai, please.
Thank you, Nitinji. The University of Mumbai Professor Bal Apte Center for Studies in Students and Youth Movements organized the 2-day national conference on role and contribution of students and youth movements in nation building during pre and post-independence era. We had to do it virtually because of the COVID restrictions in the state and in the city. So across yesterday and today, that is January 18th and 19th, we had this virtual seminar. The opening ceremony or the inaugural ceremony was graced by Professor Rajneesh Kumar Shukla, Vice Chancellor of Mahatma Gandhi Antarashtriya Hindi Vishwavidyalaya Wardha, whereas Dr. Vinay Sahasrabudhe, Honorable Member of Parliament and President of ICCR, along with being the head of the Education Committee in the Parliament, made the keynote address. The inaugural ceremony happened in the presence of Professor Ravindra Kulkarni, Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor Suhas Pednekar, the Vice Chancellor, and the Registrar, Mr. Sudhir Puranik of the Mumbai University. We also had 4 plenary sessions and various themes were discussed in those plenary sessions. The first topic of the plenary session was the Telangana statehood and other student movements of Telangana. The speaker for that session was Professor E. Vayunandan, Vice Chancellor Yashwantrao Chauhan, Maharashtra Open University. The second session was taken up by Mr. Samudragupta Kashyap, who is the Information Commissioner, Government of Assam, and has been a senior journalist and author. He spoke on the topic Student and Youth Movements in the Northeast, a case study of the Assam Ganatantra Parishad. The third plenary session was addressed by Mr. Guru Prakash Paswan, Assistant Professor of Law, University of Patna, Bihar. He spoke on the role of students in Bihar Navnirman Andolan and its impact on Indian politics. The last plenary session was taken up by Professor Shailendra Devlankar, who is a foreign policy expert, who spoke on youth movements in Asia, especially the case study of the 2019-20 Hong Kong protests. Today morning, we started the day with a panel discussion, which covered the topic Journey of Students and Youth Movements from Pre-Independence to Post-Independent India till present. Dr. Jayant Kulkarni, Director of Vigyan Bharat Institute of Technology, Hyderabad, chaired and moderated the panel discussion. The panelists included Dr. Bhushan Bhave, Executive Member of Sahitya Academy, Dr. Bal Raju, Associate Professor, Department of Social Work, Mahatma Gandhi International Hindu University. Mr. Ahmed Sheikh, a journalist and author, could not continuously join us because of a technical issue. Prafulla Ketkar, editor of Organizer Weekly, was also one of the panelists. I was glad to also be a part of the same panel. The panel discussion was followed by a guest lecture on the role of NSS in nation building as a youth movement. It was addressed by Dr. Kamal Kumar Kar, Director, NSS Directorate, New Delhi. After which we had the paper presentations. To just go in the numbers, we had received about 40 papers, among which 24 were selected to present. We had 3 parallel sessions, which were chaired by Dr. Prashant Sathe from the BMCC College, Ashutosh Bhatnagar from JNK Study Center, and Manish Joshi from Jalgaon University, respectively. Approximately around 300 plus participants actually attended our program from yesterday till today. I think this was a brief summary of the conference till now. I will hand it back over to Nitin sir.
Thank you, Devendraji. This really is a successful conference, I feel so. So now I'm going to request Dr. Prashant Sathe, who chaired one of the paper presentation sessions. He's from the BMCC and he is heading the research department. May I request Honorable Dr. Prashant Sathe to give his remarks. Okay. Sathe sir, please.
Namaste, namaste. So again, same comments from my side that as far as all participants are concerned, those who presented their research paper today, they did good efforts as far as their research process is concerned. But before I just proceed to make my comments on this research paper and overall impact on it, on this research, first of all, I express thanks to organizers, not only for inviting me, but this is one of the unique program, I feel, because since last 2 years, almost all of us, we are so much so familiar with or seasoned with this online program, seminars, webinars, lectures, meetings, all that. But Professor Bal Apte Center, and they are also organizing this program on role and contribution of students in youth movement. I feel it's very important and relevant and rational as far as today's competitive world is concerned. Because on one side, youths are increasing day by day, And on other side, their contribution is equally important as far as nation development is concerned, national development is concerned. The appropriate word used in the preamble of this webinar or seminar, and that is national reconstruction. So what I feel personally that everyone need to understood the importance and significance of this national reconstruction, what we used to call in Marathi or in Sanskrit, राष्ट्रीय पुनर्निर्माण. So ये राष्ट्रीय पुनर्निर्माण का अर्थ सही मायने में मुझे लगता है कि इस 2 दिन के संगोष्ठी में आप सबको, मैं भी उसका एक भाग हूं, तो ये राष्ट्रीय पुनर्निर्माण का अर्थ समझने के लिए इसी तरह के प्रोग्राम, इसी तरह के कार्यक्रम, इसी तरह की स्पर्धा होनी आवश्यक है. इसीलिए आई एक्सप्रेस थैंक्स टू ऑर्गेनाइजर फॉर ऑर्गेनाइजिंग सच टाइप ऑफ well equipped as well as well required part of as far as this program is concerned. Okay, leave apart. Now I am here to give my comments as far as research paper is concerned, as it's a competition, so anyone should win and lose, etc. But as far as subject, area, topic and title, all of you have selected well subject, good subject, topic is also appropriate, title is also very appropriate, and you followed appropriate research methodology also, because nowadays we are living in that SPSS, quote unquote. SPSS stands for Statistical Package for Social Science. So right from school or right from college till PhD level, everyone is well equipped with this SPSS. So I'm not worried about the data analysis and conclusion and perception and inferences and etc. But what is important for me at the end, being a research student, is it that is how so far you are connected with the society. Because the name, see, Bal Apte was a great social reformer. His total life he devoted for that national reconstruction and students movement. So please do not treat it, I hope that no one of that part of, but please do not treat it as it is one of the competition where we presented our one paper and got the prize or not. See, this is the movement, this is the young mover, this is a youth movement for national reconstruction. So if you have that type of sense, then SPSS is okay. You may use statistical package for your research, but what is important to imbibe that social attitude or to know that social aptitude and to have that social connect. Otherwise, when I was attended that one of the session, one of that group, I made a comment that we are good in research. We know how what is economical development and social development and financial literacy and all that. But what is our role and our contribution next to? For example, we are staying in one building, one flat or one bungalow, but we are not aware or our contribution, if it is not connected with a neighbor, or if it is your next building person, if you don't know, if he don't know what is your role and what is your contribution in academics and in society, then what is the use of this? Otherwise, by quote unquote, we are making a comment that role of youth in nation building, but without contributing to nearby society. So that is why my request is, my suggestion is, no doubt all of you have taken good efforts and all of you followed that appropriate research process, research methodology. But what is important and required, that connect with the society. हे समाजाचं आंदोलन व्हायला पाहिजे. When I asked question in Hindi, then many students would say, we don't have that type of, we don't use this language in our research. Friends, research doesn't confine with any specific language. No doubt English has its own way and own importance, but how so far you are connected with the society with local language. And at the end, I conclude myself by saying that it is very high, it is a high time rather, or it is appropriate time to connect ourselves with this national education policy. So if you connect yourself with society and if you interlink this topic with the national education policy, which may start from next year, I hope, because of this COVID is a problem. But otherwise, if we not connect this with NEP and if we not connect ourselves with the society, it is of no use. But I'm not critical or I'm not negative part of, I'm 100% sure that all of the research scholars and students, those who have participated in this, why you tempted to come over here? Because of the name of Bal Apte Center for Youth and Development. And that is why you have that type of sense and emotions. So I express thanks to organizer and best wishes to all paper presenter. Pai sir, shall I disclose the name of, declare the name of first, second,
Yes,
third?
sir. Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. So at the end, for which you are here without listening, because I am also curious to listen the chairman's speech on this valedictory program, Honorable Vice Chancellor and Pro Vice Chancellor. So first name, Shrima Banerjee. There are three names. I'm not saying first, second, third. Three from three groups. Shrima Banerjee is one. Chetan Gandhi is the second. And third one, Ranjit Piud. So I repeat myself, Shrima Banerjee, Chetan Gandhi, and Ranjit Piud. These three research scholars have got prize as far as this research competition is concerned. Again, the same comment, though they have got prize, others research papers are equally good. There is no any point to say plus minus, but somewhere we have to select 1, 2, 3, and that is why these are the names what we selected at the end. So thanks to research scholars for your good efforts. And I express thanks to organizer for inviting us and giving me an opportunity to share thought. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Prashant Sate sir. तुम्ही अतिशय मार्मिकपणे या सर्व डेलिब्रेशन्सच्या बद्दल आणि या लोकांनी जे रिसर्च पेपर मांडले त्याच्याबद्दल मतप्रदर्शन केलं. Yes, sir, you rightly pointed out about the language of the researchers. I think everybody should use the language which is being used by the society when they are writing. It really is a great comment, and congratulations to all the best paper presenters. And this is the time where we are going to listen to our chief guest for the valedictory function. We share a special relationship. The Mumbaites share special relationship with the Bengals because Mumbai, Bengal, Calcutta, and Chennai, that is Madras. These are the first three universities of this country in the modern education era. It is my proud privilege to introduce the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Vishwa Bharati, Shantiniketan, Professor Vidyut Chakrabarti. Sir is he is a professor of political science in University of Delhi. He obtained his PhD from London School of Economics and Political Science, UK. And he has been a prolific writer with many books published by globally reputed publishers. He is an authority in public administration. Sir is widely cited for his original contribution to Gandhi's social and political thought. His book on the ideas of Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. is also widely appreciated text. His book on coalition politics has received accolades for its distinctive approach to the phenomenon. He has a large number of articles published in refereed academic journals with high impact factors. Sir was also the nominee of the President of India for the JNU Executive Council for the period 2015 to 2017. He is also a member of the Board of Studies, Navakrishna Chaudhary Institute, Utkal University, Bhubaneswar. An acclaimed academic, Professor Chakrabarti also held various academic assignments, visiting professor in various renowned universities across the globe. Besides having brief stints as a visiting professor in the United Kingdom, Australia, and Singapore, he was the first occupant of the Mahatma Gandhi Chair for Global Nonviolence at James Madison University, Virginia, United States of America. Recently, he was appointed the DAAD professor in Germany, housed in the University of Hamburg. Sir, we are eager to listen to your words of wisdom. May I request Honorable Vice Chancellor Professor Vidyut Chakrabarti, sir, to address this gathering. So please.
Namaskar, Nitin ji, mera dost Kulkarni Sahab, Devinder, and all the participants, सबको मैं नमन करता हूँ. Prashant ji, talked about the language. It's a serious problem. Agreed. That when we talk to my friends from Mumbai, I need to talk to him or her in English. or preferably in Hindi, thanks to Bollywood. But if I talk to a friend of mine from Madras, he or she will be very offended if I speak to him or her in Hindi, so English. So, by default, English has become a language of connectivity across India. Now, ideally speaking, I wanted to speak in Bangla, but Bangla is a very, very narrowly segregated language because it hardly went beyond Bengal. So Bengal was colonized first, but somehow the other Bengalis did not have this linguistic imperialism. As a result, Bengali remained confined to Bengal. So Hindi, and I think for Hindi, it is partly in the nationalist movement and partly the Bollywood. Hindi has become more or less a pan-Indian language. Now, the sort of difficulty which I am expressing before you is not our difficulty, is the difficulty of Hindustanis since the arrival of the British in India as a colonial power. I'll begin with a short share. And that time the Shire, he was a very young guy, and most of the Shires, they die at a very young age because their life is very reckless. So this Shire said, Sikh to li aage barke, Angrezi Jaban, dar hai ke gunga ho jayega Hindustan. It means that, we are very passionate about learning English. But we never bother that because of this passion, we'll finally end up forgetting our mother tongue. So this is something which is happening today. I'm not a very, linguistic fanatic. I'm open to all languages. But today, since Prasantji talked in Marathi, Hindi, and English, Nitinji talked in Marathi, which I couldn't follow really, except that I understood only the language part because he used the term language, which is English, and Devender talked in English, so I understood. So what I'll do, I'll try to follow a typical Indian way of speaking to friends. It's called, Hinglish, Hindi and English, a combination of Hindi and English, because I think the sort of discussion which I'm going to make is my personal tribute to Professor Balwant Parashuram Apte, known as Professor Apte. And I'm sure those who are attending today's seminar, they must have had interaction with him. I had an interaction with him when I was a student of college, Calcutta Presidency College. And I came in a conference in Delhi. And that time he was not so well known, but he was part of the ABVP. So because of that kind of connectivity, I met him, and then I met him several times. So I think Balapteji was very fluent, was very comfortable, of course in Marathi, because that's his mother tongue, English and Hindi. So I think, since it's a personal tribute to Apteji, I would like to use the language which nowadays known as English, because to me, I'll use some interesting poems to explain the ideological preferences that we got from Apteji. Now, those who know Apteji, they know that Apteji insisted on the idea of reconstruction of the nation. I mean, the point which Prasantji made, Rashtriya Punarnirman. Now, at that point of think of 70s, and I met him immediately after emergency. And at that point of time, we thought about it. I mean, many of the stature of Apteji, they also started thinking in terms of national reconstruction, following typical indigenous mode of thinking. And the Morarji Desai government at that point of time encouraged this kind of ideas to come forward. And Apteji was one of the leading figures in conceptualizing some of these ideas in his book. I'm sure you must have seen this book, Nation First. This particular book to me is an essential book for all of us to know what sort of initiative Apteji took under not so convenient circumstances. It was not adverse because, as I said, after the emergency was withdrawn, the situation appeared to be little, different from what it was earlier. At least now we started thinking in terms of looking back at our, intellectual past, which was an anathema, so far as Nehruvian regime was concerned. But after the withdrawal of emergency, with the rise of an alternative kind of politics, we really started thinking in terms of unearthing the intellectual resources of the ancient past. So Apteji, I think, I still remember, the discussion which I had in a small room, mostly in Gandhi Peace Foundation, and we had, our discussion hours together. And that time it was not so crowded, fortunately for us, because nowadays if Apteji was around, if he agreed to speak, I think it is very difficult to get into him, because nowadays, as you know, because of political changes, people start flocking around the intellectual giants of this kind of ideology. But we are fortunate that we had easy interaction with a person of the stature of Apteji, because that time this particular ideological preference didn't gain much, publicity. So that was an advantage and also a disadvantage, in the sense that Apteji didn't see the way we are thinking now. I mean, I am also now very old, and I'm very happy to see that Apte Center in Bombay University, and fortunately I was there when it was inaugurated with the support of Bombay University colleagues, Kulkarni Sahab and the VC Sahab, and I was there. So I think I'm very happy to be part of this conference, and I'm very thankful to my friend Kulkarni ji to have invited me to this gathering, so that I can at least be introduced to the colleagues who are thinking alike. Now, it's a long introduction, but first of all, let me tell you a very interesting thing. Probably you don't know, or some of them, those who are very close to Apteji, they must have had this kind of discussion earlier. So I'm trying to remind you, or rather refresh your memory about Apteji. Now, when we talked about students, Apteji never made a distinction between students and the non-students, because he accepted the word students in a very wider sense. Because to him, the students are not merely those who are formally associated with the center of learning. It may be school, it may be college, it may be university. But students are those who are trying to understand society, the point which Nitinji made, the point which Prasanji made, that a student is one who is interested to know society around him or her. So, and that's why Bhakti said that we will continue to remain students throughout our life, because it's very difficult to know society's ins and outs in one lifetime. So the students is not merely those who are studying formally. Students are those who are curious about what is happening around him or her. So as a result of that, take students as an acronym of many activities. Now, these activities are associated with anybody, and if you find that a person or an individual is associated with these activities, according to him, and I also endorse that point of view after having spent so many years in academia, that Apteji was really quite, was correct, and he had the foresight of visualizing what was going to happen in 2022. So I think students to him was an acronym of activities. What are those activities? If my memory serves me correct, then I think, S for him meant studious. Studious means, it doesn't mean that you have to study your books. Studiousness means that whatever you try to learn, first you have to do the background study. Suppose if I want to know Bombay or Mumbai, as we call nowadays, we have to know about Mumbai by reference to the published material or interacting with people or reading many texts. So unless and until you have that kind of studiousness, you will not be drawn to those materials. So to be a student, S to him stood for studiousness. Now T is tenacity. Now that's a very important quality, because unless and until you have tenacity, you really cannot attain things. Tenacity means lage raho. There are failures, but still lage raho. And if you keep on insisting on doing a particular thing, success is bound to come. So that's the point which he made, that unless and until you have that tenacity, you cannot attain things which you have set out for yourself. There is no magic wand. There is no Aladdin ka chirag that you just hold the chirag and you get the genie will appear and give things to you. No, that's not reality. That's a dream. So tenacity is an important characteristic of a student. So then you needs to be unique in your approach. U stands for uniqueness. Whatever we think, whatever we decide, whatever we ponder over, we always think from our own point of view. And Apteji always respected everybody's point of view. Sometimes what we do, we tend to ignore some of the views of the students, saying, oh no, he doesn't know much, she doesn't know much, whatever he is saying is bakwas. But Apteji never ever made this kind of comment. He always believed that everybody has got uniqueness. So whatever he or she says must have some unique point which you need to take out. So uniqueness is one of the characteristics of a student. STU. Then D. D means driven. Unless and until you dream about anything, unless and until you apply imagination for anything, you cannot be creative. So a student needs to be a dreamer. Now, for instance, at this age, probably I cannot be a dreamer because I have got many vested interests to look after, and I have my personal vested interest. But a student, normally doesn't develop vested interest, so he can afford to be a dreamer. He can afford to be swayed by his imagination. And unless and until this kind of dreaming is there, students cannot be a students. And then finally, E for energetic. You have to have the energy to carry on the work which you want to accomplish. So unless and until you have got physical energy, mental energy, you cannot really attain the goal. So you have to be energetic. And then finally, student has to develop some kind of trust, trustworthiness. The last T stands for trustworthiness. Now, unless and until I have developed trust in you, you'll not listen to me. So the students, have to have these qualities according to Apte Sahab: studiousness, S, then tenacity, then uniqueness, then dreaming, energetic, and finally trustworthiness. Now, if you have these qualities in combination, then probably Apteji would recognize you as a student. You don't have to be part of a formal institution. But if you have these qualities, as far as Apteji was concerned, he or she will be considered a student. Now, to me, this is a very inspiring kind of explanation. Because a student, as Prasantji referred and Nitin also referred to that aspect, nowadays we are engaged in national reconstruction. Vinayji must have talked about it, because I am in touch with him. He is coming to Vishwar the day after tomorrow.
There is some technical hitch. Yes, sir, will join in a minute. Thank you for your patience.
technical. So, you know,
Sir, you're audible, sir. You're
Yes.
audible. Sir.
Okay.
Okay, sir.
Now,
Thank
you know, so, you know, the point which I am trying to make that, you know, this particular definition which Apteji gave to us when we were really young. I'm talking about, you know, 75, 76. That time I was young in ancient times. So, you know, I remember those words because, you know, students are not formally associated, are not those who are formally associated with universities, but students are those who have inclination towards all these, you know, qualities. And probably, you know, the objective which we have now set out for ourselves, national reconstruction or reconstruction of the nation, is something which is possible only if we take students in its wider sense. Now then comes Apteji ka jo, I'll just, you know, depend on Apteji's this particular book, Nation. And I'm trying to, because to me, I carry this book wherever I go, and I keep on reading this book because this book has helped me understand many complicated, complex, you know, Indian reality. And this book was written, you know, when he was in his 70s. I mean, before he became member of Rajya Sabha, because he didn't have much time to focus on this intellectual creativity. So to me, this book is the foundation of the ideas with Apteji saying. So on the basis of this book, I have, you know, derived my what is called you know, my source of inspiration for today's talk. Now, if we accept the definition which Apteji provided, then from there I'm just taking off. You know, I'd like to explain Apteji's definition with reference to a very famous poem written by, again, a Bombay wala, Harivansh Rai Bachchan. Harivansh Rai Bachchan, you know, wrote about students, but interestingly, this particular text was written in the late 19th century, late 20th century. I think, no, 2001 probably, 2001. So, and Apteji wrote about all these things in 75. You know, I learned it from him in the 75. The same idea which Apteji articulated in the 75 came out in a poem written by Harivansh Rai Bachchan in 2001. So, you know, I'm making this point simply to argue that Apteji had the foresight of what a student should be and how he or she should learn things from around society. These are the ideas which were articulated very clearly by Harivansh Rai Bachchan, the famous poet. You know, I'm sure, you know, I don't have to mention his son's name to identify him. He is known by himself. So he said, how do you define students in contemporary India, contemporary times? Now, I'll just read the poem in Hindi and then I'll explain in English. Shraddha ज्ञान देती है, श्रद्धा ज्ञान देती है, नम्रता मान देती है, नम्रता मान देती है, यज्ञता स्थान देती है, यज्ञता स्थान देती है। पर तीनों जब एक साथ मिल जाए, तो व्यक्ति को हर जगह सम्मान देती है, तो व्यक्ति को हर जगह सम्मान देती है। कीमत हर चीज की होती है, पर ज्ञान का की कोई कीमत नहीं होती। शिक्षा ही माध्यम है जो कर्तव्य मार्ग को बतलाती है। शिक्षा ही वो मार्ग है जो कर्तव्य मार्ग को बतलाती है। अच्छा कौन है, बुरा कौन है, इन सब का बोध कराती है। Now, you know, the gist of this story, to me, it's one of my favorite, you know, poem of Harivansh Rai Bachchan. Now, he said that respect leads to knowledge. Namrata, humility gives you izzat, dignity. Yagata, capability आपको place you in the society. But when these three are combined, Shraddha, respect, humility, and capability. If these three are combined, it gives you a specific place in society. Now, unless and until you have respect for others, and that respect originates out of your humility, and respect originates out of your capability, only then you are going to be accepted seriously by others. The point which you just made, that we are talking about nations, reconstruction of the nation. The reconstruction of the nation is possible only when we extend respect to others, only when we are humble, to approach others, and thirdly, we have the capability, or we have the capacity, or we have the inclination to do things good for the people at large. Now, to me, the same thing which Apteji talked about in the mid-70s, the same thing is being repeated by Harivansh Rai Bachchan in the first year of 2000. Then he carried that how do you manage to gain this? It's also the Harivansh Rai Bachchan also devised a formula, devised a way, devised a means. He said that only through education you earn Shraddha, you earn Namrata, you earn Yajnata. So Shikha, here education does not mean, again, I am drawing upon Apteji's own understanding. Education does not necessarily mean what we get from the university, what we get from the institutionalized mode of education. You can be educated from somebody who is selling fish in a market. You can be educated from somebody who is plowing a land in remote areas of my district, for instance. So I think education again has a wider connotation. So both Apteji and later on Harivansh Rai Bachchan ji talked about education more or less in the same language. So I think the friend, I am trying to make the argument that whatever Apteji said in the 70s and 80s continue to remain relevant even in the 21st century. This is 2022. I mean, already 2 decades have passed, and we are still, we still believe that whatever Apteji said in the mid-70s of the last century continue to be relevant even today. The second part which I'll explain, then how come and how relevant Apteji is in today's context. I'll explain this part with reference to another poem by another famous Hindi Kabi. His name is Ramdhari Singh Dinkar. He's known as Dinkar, but his name is Ramdhari Singh Dinkar. Ramdhari Singh Dinkar, talked about the same thing which Apteji talked in that particular acronym, students, in a very poetic language. And if if I read it and then I'll explain, then you will agree with me that Apteji had the foresight of seeing what was going to happen once we talk about construction of the nation in the light of the ideas which we ignored, deliberately or politically for the advantage of a particular political section of the country. Now, Dinkarji said, what should be the aim of a student? How should a student see the reality? I mean, we are talking about the social reality around you. How will you see it? Because Dinkarji was trying to devise a mirror through which you will see the reality. Now, Dinkarji said, Choro mat apni aan. Choro mat apni aan. Aan means commitment. Shish kaat jaye. Agar gala kaat bhi jaye. Choro mat apni aan. Mat jhuko anay par. Anay means niti, rules, rule, niti. Niti means, morality. Morality is niti according to Dinkar. Mat jhuko anay par. Bhale bomb fat jaye. Bhale bomb fat jaye. Dobara nahi Yamraj कष्ट करता, दोबारा नहीं यमराज कष्ट करता है, दोबारा नहीं यमराज कष्ट करता है, मरता है जो एक बारी मरता है, मरता है जो एक बारी मरता है। तुम स्वयं मृत्यु को मुख पर चरण धरो रे, तुम स्वयं मृत्यु का मुख पर चरण धरो रे, जीना हो तो मरने से डरो नहीं रे, जीना हो तो मरने से डरो नहीं रे। Now, these 6 lines to me are very, very significant, and we need to understand the inner meaning of these 6 lines. Now, what Dinkarji is saying? Dinkarji is saying that, you have to have the determination. You have to have the determination to fight for a particular cause. And how will you get determination? Only if you have commitment to the morality or commitment to your goals. Now here we are talking about reconstruction of the nation. So that's our goal. And so we should be committed to fulfill that particular goal. So Dinkarji said that even if your shish kat jaye, aapka gala kisi ne kaat diya, to bhi aapne aap commitment bhulo mat. Because commitment is prior to your existence as a human being. Only then, if you just have that kind of strong determination, only then you will be able to achieve the goal for which you have the commitment to take country ahead in accordance with your priority. And then he said that, for that, what you should do, you should not, you should not get scared at the sight of death. Because you will die once. You cannot die twice. You cannot die thrice. Because Yamraj ek bari aata hai, and you don't know when Yamraj will come to take you back. So don't get scared that if I follow my commitment, if I have the strong determination, I'll be killed. So what? But I'll be killed for my determination. Now here also, I am reminded of Apteji. Apteji had that kind of rebellious spirit that if you want to achieve a goal, then first you have to have the commitment. Second, you have to have the determination, and third, you have to have the determination to even die for the sake of the cause. So this is basically the introductory phase which I thought I must share with you. Now, after having read Apteji, this particular book and many articles, I categorize his text into 3 components. The first component, which I define as spiritual. The second component is political. And the third component is ideological. Spiritual, political, and ideological. If you are interested, you may like to accept this kind of conceptual format to understand how Apteji articulated his political ideological preferences. Now, spiritual, what did he mean by that? Now, he always argued that spiritual means, you have to have the connectivity with the spiritual foundation of the country to which you belong. Now, see, this is a very interesting kind of observation. He was talking about the spiritual foundation of the country. So he was talking about India. Now, when you talk of India, India is not Maharashtra. India is not Bengal. India is not Delhi. But India is India, which is highly multifaceted, which is highly culturally multifarious, which is, in one word, multicultural, multi-ideological, multi-ethnic. So, India is a diverse, very diverse. Now, in order to appreciate this diversity, you have to have that kind of mental inclination. Suppose, I am a fish eater, and I know many of my friends are not fish eater because they are strictly vegetarian. Biraiji, for instance. Biraiji, as you know, is a vegetarian, pakka vegetarian. So he kept telling me that Bidutji, aapke liye to fish not vegetarian. But at the same time, we are so good friends, despite the fact we are so different. He is culturally typical Marathi. I am culturally typical Bengali. But when we talk, we always talk in terms of our identity as an Indian. Now, then you may ask the question, how is it possible? Now, here, I think what Apteji meant at that point of time when he talked about spiritualism, he talked about civilizational ethos. Now, when you talk of civilizational ethos, it needs little explanation. Now, civilization ethos is based on certain ideas which are being nurtured over a period of time. Now, if you remember Gandhiji, now Gandhiji was asked, what is your religion? Gandhiji replied, I am a Hindu. Then he said, how will you say you are a Hindu? He said, I am a Hindu because I believe in Upanishad, one, and secondly, I worship cow as mother. So, this is the characteristics of a Hindu according to Gandhiji. So, and that doesn't matter that Gandhiji accepted Maulana Azad as a colleague. The Gandhiji accepted Badshah Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan as his colleague. Gandhiji accepted Bidhan Chandra Rai from Kolkata as his colleague. Gandhiji accepted Gopabandhu Chaudhary from Odisha as his colleague. Gandhiji accepted G.B. Pant from Uttar Pradesh as his colleague. So, there are, I can give you innumerable names to show that when Apteji talked about spiritualism, he was referring to this interesting dimension of the country called India, which is connected with one another, not on the basis of language, not on the basis of culture, not on the basis of religion, but on the basis of civilizational ethos. So this is the first point. If you look at Apteji's writings, you'll find the reflection of this kind of concern, that his main concern was to bring India together. And his idea is called nation. The book is Nation First. He was talking about nation. Now here, I just would like to digress a little bit. Later on, I'm sure those who are interested can read this particular text. Tagore gave 3 lectures on nation. And in 1916, 1 in Japan and 2 in the United States. And that particular collection is now published by Rupa. It was published in 1919, and you'll find the latest edition published by Rupa. Now, there also Tagore questioned nationalism, which was conceptualized in its very narrow sense, mainly European sense. With the idea which came out in the lexicon of political scientists, social scientists, after 1648 Westphalia Treaty. When the idea of nation on the basis of one language, one culture, one religion, one dress code, one food habit. So Robert Tagore said, this is simply contrary to our existence. We don't believe in it. I mean, for instance, though I prefer Bengali food, but occasionally I also like biryani. Now, this is not part of my culture, but over a period of time, it became part of my culture. Those who know Delhi, Karim is a good restaurant where you find typical Mughlai khana, and you have to book the table in advance, well in advance, a week in advance to get a place there. What does it mean? It means that we have internalized this cultural ethos by virtue of being Indian. So this is what probably Apte meant, because I had many discussions, many sittings with him, and I tried to understand his psyche. I mean, I was young, but at the same time, I was very curious to know his unique conceptualization. So by spiritualism, he clearly meant the importance of civilizational ethos. The second point, which I said, political. Now he argued that if you simply think about it, spiritual connectivity, it doesn't make any sense. So you have to articulate it in practice. How will you do that? There comes the importance of organization. So in order to politically articulate your views, you have to have the organization. There comes the importance of ABVP or any organizational platform you can think of. So political articulation of a particular ideological preference is possible only when you have an organizational backup. So, he said that those who are interested, those who are keen to follow this kind of ideological preferences need to come out openly and pursue this spiritual goal through that political platform. That's why, as you know, he is one of the important ideologues of the ABVP. And it is true that during his time, ABVP didn't really have the kind of importance which it has now. But at least he was the one who started this idea that ABVP was the right kind of platform for the students interested in this kind of ideological preferences. I don't misunderstand me that I am trying to propagate the ideological preferences of a particular group. No, I'm as an academic, I am just sharing my own understanding of Apteji's political preferences. So the political, and then out of your political work through an organization, it can be X, Y, Z, it can be A, B, C, it can be anything. But you have to think in terms of the abbreviation which I mentioned, and also the two poems which I mentioned. That means, once you begin working for the articulation of these ideological preference, then you are ideologically indoctrinated. You are ideologically drawn to a particular point of view. That you are convinced that if you think in terms of reconstruction of the nation, you have to have this kind of views. Now, communists have one kind of point of view. The Nehruvian is another kind of view, and we tried all the alternatives, and we know the outcome. India really suffered much because of our blind support to these bygone ideological preferences. Nowadays there are many who will probably identify me as a villain of history, or identify Apteji as a villain of history. But if you look at his ideological preferences, and he wrote it very extensively, he didn't keep it inside. He wrote it extensively. He put it in the public domain. So you can always dissect his ideas on the basis of the question whether it is relevant or not. And I'm persuaded to believe that the ideological preferences which Apteji mentioned in the mid 70s, as I said, I'm too old at this point of time. So it's very difficult for me to change my priorities simply because I've been associated with this ideological wave for so many years, and not because of anything else, but because I'm convinced that this is an alternative which we should have explored earlier. But we couldn't do it because of historical forces which were against those who wanted to establish this kind of ideological preference, and Apteji was one of them. So, but now the situation has come. Now the scene appears to have been favorably disposed towards exploring. I'm not saying that this is the best. I'm not, as I said, I'm not arguing. I'm not holding brief for any political outfit. I'm simply saying that now a situation has come. A scene appears to be propitious, to explore this alternative which Apteji talked about. Now, then the last bit of my presentation, that Apteji did not talk about Tagore. It is very interesting. He didn't talk about Tagore. He questioned Gandhiji on several occasions. He referred to Tagore as one who wrote Gitanjali. That's it. But after having spent 3 years in Vishwabharati, I think I would like to supplement Apteji's assessment of the situation with reference to what I have learned after having read Tagore's creative texts. Now, Tagore probably foresaw some of the ideas which Apteji talked about in the 70s, in the early part of the 20th century. I just would request all my colleagues to read, Tagore's idea of reconstruction of the nation, which he articulated in a text which was published in 1904. The name of the text is Swadeshi Samaj. Now, Swadeshi Samaj, that was written in Bangla, but it was translated in English, not by himself, but by somebody else. You can get the English translation as well, but English translation is not so good. But being a Bengali, I had the access to the Bengali text, and I found out that many of the ideas which Apteji, felt so powerfully, so persuasively, had its root in Tagore's that particular text, Swadeshi Samaj. Now, I'll just give you three important features. Then you will understand the kind of parallel between what Apteji said in this particular book, Nation First, and Tagore's 1904 text, the Swadeshi Samaj. How is the time? Is the time okay? Is the time okay?
Yes, sir, please continue. Please continue.
If you feel bored, please let me know.
No, sir, please continue.
Okay. So, Tagore, Swadeshi Samaj has got three important features, and in a way, he probably foresaw what Apteji was going to talk about in the mid 70s. Now, Swadeshi Samaj, you can make out, from the title, that he was interested in self-reliant countryside. Now, self-reliant countryside, to me, these are very important three expressions. Now, he didn't talk about cities like Mumbai or cities like Kolkata. If you come to Shantiniketan, मैंने पहले ही बताया था कुलकर्णी साहब को, यहाँ पे ठंड ज्यादा है क्योंकि ये गांव है. Now, being born and raised in Kolkata, being awarded Nobel Prize in 1930, he decided not to stay in Calcutta. He came to a gaon or village called Shantiniketan. And this particular village, Shantiniketan is the name of the building, which his father constructed in 1861. And then from that particular building, the name of the area is given Shantiniketan. So Shantiniketan is not the name of the area. It became the name of the area, but it started with the name of the building constructed by Tagore's father, Debendranath Tagore, and the name of the building was Shantiniketan, abode of peace. मतलब आप वहां के जाके you get peace, you derive peace by being there. So Tagore, instead of developing a university or a center of alternative learning in Calcutta or around Calcutta, he came all the way to a village, to a remote village. It's about 360 kilometers away from Kolkata, in a village called Bhubondanga. In the original name of this village is Bhubondanga. So he found out that most of the villagers here, they suffer a lot due to poverty. They suffer a lot due to the outbreak of an epidemic like cholera and malaria. Now, both cholera and malaria, cholera is a waterborne disease, and malaria, the mosquitoes are produced because of stagnant water. So Tagore, first he said that first we have to address these problems. First we have to think in terms of ensuring good health to the people. And he was talking about these from 1914 onwards. And by 1913, with his Nobel Prize, he became a global name. So Gandhiji requested him to join the nationalist movement. He declined. He said, I am not strong enough to take care of the nationalist movement, but I can take care of 2-3 villages. If I can improve these 2-3 villages by being sensitive to their demands, by being sensitive to their concerns, by being sensitive to their problems, then probably these 2-3 villages will become ideal villages, will become a model to the rest of the country. So Tagore focused on this particular village called Bhubondanga, and you will be surprised to know, Kulkarni Sahab, this is rare. What Modi ji talked about in 2016, Tagore talked about it in 1921. What is so special about that? Tagore adopted 50 villages when he started the university. He said, university is not to contribute to learned people. University is meant to contribute to the people who are concerned about the society. The point which Prashant ji made, which Nitin ji made, which everybody makes nowadays, that you have to be sensitive to the requirement of the location in which you are surviving. Now, if you simply get secluded from the people at large, probably you will have a good life. But once you contribute to their well-being, you get heavenly pleasure. So Tagore said, see, as human beings, we have to work for human beings, and the villagers are suffering miserably, and so in that case, we have to go there and contribute to their well-being. Now here, Tagore also devised a very unique formula. He said that, if you want to take somebody out of poverty, what we tend to do normally? We normally give, kind of, alms to the beggar. कुछ पैसा दे दिया. तो टेगोर ने कहा, भाई पैसा दिया कितना? मतलब हफ्ता के लिए, 10 दिन के लिए, 15 दिन के लिए, 1 महीने के लिए. He will not be a beggar. He will, who are good mobilizers, So the point I'm trying to make that, it was Tagore who tried to build nation from a different perspective altogether. Because if you look at Gandhiji, if you look at Nehru, if you look at all the nationalist, liberal leaders, they borrowed the model from the West, typical liberal constitutionalism. But Rabindranath Tagore was the one who devised a unique formula for India's contribution. So the first is self-reliant village. The second is committed people willing to contribute to the well-being of the people. Committed people willing to contribute to the well-being of the people. Now, don't you find here the resonance of the idea which Apteji suggested in the mid-70s? I'm just sharing that with you. Most of you must have read this particular book later, but I'm the one who was privy to his ideas in the mid-70s. So I remember most of his discussion, most of the discussion that I had with him. So the commitment, that's something which he talked about. That's why he defined students with those kind of qualities. So commitment to contribute to the well-being of the people at large was something which Tagore also highlighted. And thirdly is that human beings should develop as a collectivity. Human beings should develop as a collectivity. Now, what did he mean by that? Here, the idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Here, the idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, and you will be surprised to know that Vishwabharati was based on 2 Upanishadic dictum. One is Atra Vishwam Bhavati Ek Needam. Vishwabharati is that place, is the nest of the world. People from all over the world will come to Vishwabharati. That's why it's called Vishwabharati. It's not Vishwabharati University. It's called Vishwabharati, where you will find Bharat and Vishwa simultaneously, globe and India, the macro and the micro. So, when you think of collectivity in Tagorean terms, it meant collectivity not only in India, collectivity cutting across the national boundaries. So, the idea of humanity being prime, being predominant is the guiding factor of Tagore's conceptualization. So I think, to my understanding of both Apteji's idea of nation and Tagore's idea of nation, I find there is a lot of similarity. And Tagore foresaw some of the ideas which Apteji developed in greater detail in the 70s and 80s. And to some extent, I would say that probably Tagore foresaw some of the ideas of Apteji, and Apteji developed it in full scale. Now, last point, since you talked about NEP, I think as Vice Chancellor of a university, I must make 1 or 2 observations on the NEP. Now, NEP to me is not the final shape of India's educational map. To me, NEP is a blueprint. Basically, it's a blueprint. It's basically, it articulates certain steps which you should take to take education forward following different mode of conceptualization. So education is being, enslaved by the Western mode of thinking, by the Western discourses. Now, I have nothing against it. Western discourses need to be understood. Liberal discourses need to be understood. But that doesn't mean that we'll forget our Upanishad, we'll forget our Vedas, we'll forget our classical text, we'll forget our we'll forget Chanakya's Arthashastra. So there is no contradiction. If you want to be a student in the sense Apteji understood, you have to be open-minded, and then you decide. That's why I said that the components: spiritual, political, and ideological. Ideologically, you test whether these ideas are appropriate to understand their reality better than anything else. So I think the NEP is, to me, is a blueprint one, in the sense that it provides the steps to go forward by following a different mode of conceptualization, which is very critical, which is very important, because so far we have been servile to the mindset of the Western discourses. Now we are trying to get out of it. And I think I'm not saying that we'll just shut our eyes to the Western discourses. No, we'll have to keep it in mind that in the dissemination of knowledge, or in the creation of knowledge, I think the discourses from the West and the East, they contributed. So, as a sensitive human being, we need to be, respectful to the ideas which are coming from different locations. This is the first point about NEP. The second point, now I like NEP because NEP talks about certain ideas in the preamble. If you look at the first 2-3 pages of the NEP, which I call the preamble to the document, there you'll find this particular section talks about certain important ideas, certain important values, which are critical for you to develop as a human being. Now, there are many, but there were 22 points in those 3 pages. But of these 3 pages, I found out 3 important values which stand out. What are those values? The first value, ethics. Now, ethics, as I said, Apteji talks about morality. The student has to have morality. Now, so morality is something which is connected with ethics. Unless and until you have morality, to respect the seniors, morality to be respectful to the people who are poor, morality to the respect to the people who have a different food habit, morality to be respectful to the people who have a different culture. So, acceptance on the basis of agreeing to be respectful to values despite being different. So that's the idea which NEP talks about, that you have to be ethically oriented to understand or to do things as a student. Prashanji talks about we have to be very sensitive to the requirement of society at large. And this is being reiterated by so many scholars all over the country, even all over the world nowadays. So this is one value which is very critical to me. The second value is constitutional obedience to the provisions of the Constitution and also the conventions. Now here, one might argue that India doesn't believe in convention. India is essentially governed by a written constitution, which is partly true. And if you look at the Indian legal system, Article 21, you have to go by procedure established by law. So what you are saying is partly correct, but partly wrong. Because, we are socialized in terms of the values which we derive from our family. We are, raised in an environment in which the values transmitted by the parents, values transmitted by the grandparents, values transmitted by the relatives are very critical. So these are conventions, these are not constitutionally written. That you have to, do pranam to the elders. It's not written in the Constitution. You have to be respectful to your teachers. It's not written in the Constitution. So, the point which they talks about when they talk about the constitutional obedience to the principles of Constitution and conventions, I think the NEP is talking about the importance of the values which are not within the Constitution, but which are part and parcel of our upbringing as Indian, of our upbringing as a human being. And here the NEP recognizes the critical role of the parents, critical role of the seniors. The next generation, if you want to make them sensitive to the constitutional values, sensitive to ethics, it is our responsibility. If I do not transport these values to my kids, to the people in my mohalla, then I am not fulfilling my role. I am not fulfilling my role. I am very selfish by being secluded from the society at large. So this is the second important dimension of NEP, which is very important. And third, importance of local language. Now, this is important. This is very critical. We talked about, Nitinji talked in Marathi. Now, I'm sorry, I couldn't follow it, but, I appreciate it because at least, I am comfortable in speaking in Bangla. Though, because, I was raised in an English medium school, went to college where the medium instruction was English, went to England where I studied in English. So probably, I forgot my mother tongue. That's why I started with that. Sikh to li aage barke Angrezi Jaban dar hai ki gunga ho jayega Hindustan. But this particular document, NEP 2020, insisted on learning local language, learning vernacular. Now, this is very important. We have not emphasized this aspect at all. If you look at a 1986 new education policy, if you look at 1982 education policy, 86 is just a kind of amended version of 1982 policy. You'll find they are dependent essentially on the Western discourses. They are dependent on learning how the Western world see the so-called non-Western world. As a result, we become servile in our thinking process. Then I would recommend you to see the film by Ray, The Home and the World. It's based on Tagore's novel Ghore Baire. And the Bengalis at that point of time were so servile that they rejoiced when the Liberal Party won in England. But a Liberal Party also endorsed colonialism in India. The Bengalis didn't have that kind of mindset at that point of time, and it is being continued even today. The personal rivalry, jealousy, pulling somebody down. These are the things going on. I think these are the vices which we have derived from colonialism. Now, NEP is trying to hit that, trying to scuttle that by providing an alternative. Now, this is the preamble part, which is very fascinating to me. That's why I shared my own assessment of the preamble. And the second important part, it's a long discussion, so I'll have to stop now. The second important part is the importance of audit of what is being taught. That's very important. Now, I'm sure those who are teachers here, including Kulkarni Sahab, they know that this time Bombay University should be very happy because they got A++ in NAC accreditation. Vishwabharati is far, far below the accreditation which Bombay University got. So the standard of education, if you think in terms of NAC, or if you think in terms of NIRF, or if you think of any of the ranking globally, then it differs from one place to another. Why? Simply because Bombay University attract talents, Vishwabharati cannot. Now, Delhi University attract talents, JNU attract talents, but other universities cannot. So why this discrimination? Because we are all central universities. Government of India is spending money more or less in equal terms, or the state government is spending money more or less in equal terms vis-a-vis the university. Yet there is a fluctuation in terms of standards. And if the students are given a chance to go to X, Y, or Z, they decide to go to X, Y, or Z in terms of employability, terms of whether this particular degree will give them employment or not. That means, learning, or the idea which Aptiji talks about, spiritual connectivity, is something which is not prior. But this education policy, by introducing audit of the education in the universities, will try, at least has taken a step. I'm not saying that it will be done overnight. Probably it will take some more decades to bring all universities under one platform, or more or less the same standard will prevail in all the universities. But at least I welcome this step which is taken by NAP, that academic audit is something which is very important. I mean, nowadays you must have seen there is a kind of surge of private universities, and the students tend to go to private university, or the well-off parents prefer to send their kids to a good private university by spending money out of their pocket. But there are many, I think majority of Indians do not have that kind of capacity to go to private educational institution to study. So here I think this particular step is very useful, that private universities and the public universities need to be taken into account at par. Only then this sort of discrimination will disappear. And I'm sure those who are of my generation, they know that when we are students of a school, there was we are really trying to get into a government school because the standard was so good. But nowadays, my kids, they didn't go to a government school, because government school in Delhi, the standard has gone down. The people, those who come here, they don't bother about education. And I think here comes the role of the academicians, role of the government, and role of the policy makers. And I think NEP is the one who has identified the importance of these three important segments of society. And I'm sure that in course of time, probably, as I said, I may not be able to see the positive impact of NEP, but I'm sure the next generation will understand, will see the outcome of this NEP, which is an attempt to standardize education in the country as a whole. Now, I think, friends, it's a rare opportunity for me to reiterate some of my assessment of Apte Saab's ideas and link it with Tagore, and also talk about my brief observation about NEP. I'm thankful to my friend Kulkarni Sahab and also the organizer to have given me the opportunity to share, because I think I spoke more than what was the time what was given to me. Sorry if I cause any discomfort to the organizer. I'm really sorry. इसके लिए क्षमा मांगता हूँ, क्योंकि देखिए टीचर को एक हैबिट हो जाता है, एक आदत बन जाता है। जब एक मौका मिलता है पढ़ाने के लिए, टीचर भूल जाता है टाइम। मैं बेसिकली एक टीचर हूँ जो नितिन जी बिल्कुल बताया नहीं। नितिन जी मेरे बारे में बहुत कुछ बताया, लेकिन ये बताया नहीं that I am basically a teacher. वो उसको थोड़ा सा मैंने आपको बता दिया, I am basically a teacher. नमस्कार देवेंद्र, नमस्कार नितिन जी.
Thank you, sir. Vidyut ji, I'm sure that everyone enjoyed listening to you. आपने बात की प्रोफेसर बाला साहेब आप्टे जी के बारे में शुरुआत में. You spoke about your close association with him. You shared about the book and the contents of the book with us. Lastly, you extensively spoke on the national education policy. On behalf of University of Mumbai, I wholeheartedly thank you for it. हम program आगे लेकर जाएंगे, and I would now invite the Pro Vice Chancellor of Mumbai University, Professor R.D. Kulkarni sir, to present the presidential address.
Thank you, Devendra. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are.
Okay. Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Chakravarti sir, Vice Chancellor, Vishwa Bharati Shanti Niketan, who is the chief guest of this 2 days national conference. All the other associated, those who have been associated with this conference, like Devendra Pai, Dr. Sunil Patil, Dr. Niti Narekar, Professor Principal Ajay Bhambre, Professor Jayant Kulkarni, and all my dear participants who enjoyed the 2 days deliberations on the at the national conference on role of students and youth movements in pre-independence and post-independence era in nation building. Friends, we enjoyed, in fact, over last 45 minutes, the speech by Professor Chakravarti. Let me tell you to the participants of this conference that Professor Chakravarti was primarily instrumental in establishment of Professor Bhai Center of Studies for Students and Youth Movement. He came to University of Mumbai, stayed here, and provided a logical understanding, logical philosophy of Professor Bhai Center of Studies for Students and Youth Movement. So it was indeed a pleasure for University of Mumbai to have Professor Chakravarti as the chief guest for the valedictory function of this 2 days conference, who himself has coined the idea of establishment of Professor Bhai Center at University of Mumbai. Professor Chakravarti in his speech has elaborated and shared his experiences of working with Professor Bhai. He has cited various quotes from the Nation First, the book written by Professor Bhai. He has shared thoughts as well as his experience of working with Professor Bhai. Particularly, probably all the participants must have enjoyed the elaborative definitions of the students in terms of word by word, going with like a student as someone who is standing for studiousness, or having a right flexibility or tenacity, or having a uniqueness with a good energy, and would have been driven by a right cause, and would always be a trustworthy. It was, in fact, Professor Bhai who ensured the right ideology for student movement, and his greatest contribution, as rightly mentioned by Professor Chakravarti, has been the one in taking up the student movements just beyond the activism, but rather the activism is normally a reactionary, but rather taking up students and youth movements in having a right consciousness, in understanding the responsibilities with reference to the society, and naturally the role in building nation. Professor Chakravarti quoted Kavi Dinkarji and Kavi Harivansh Rai Bachchan in presenting the aspects such as commitment and determination for the cause, which the student must acquire or develop and move forward for reconstruction of a nation building. We need to, of course, as a center for students and youth movements, we need to encourage the student movements in the country to stand up, organize, and constructively struggle for a larger cause. Professor Chakravarti elaborated the perspective of Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore in establishment of Vishwa Bharati as like Vishwa together with Bharat, with a greater idea of humanity, well-being of the people, and the nation building in the larger sense. Gurudev Tagore always opposed the colonial mindset, the imperialism, and always supported the well-being of said the citizens, and probably gave a highest importance to the humanity. And it is rightly being pointed out by Professor Chakravarti that Professor Bhai elaborated these concepts in greater details with a finer print. As a sensitive human being, of course, we need to be very much inclusive in values which are very much important in our upbringing, as well as we need to have a right constitutional obedience, and the in its, I hope I'm audible.
Yes, sir, you're audible.
He elaborated the positive aspects of national education policy, and I'm glad to present to the delegates of the. I'm glad to present to the delegates of this conference that University of Mumbai has already have taken up the membership academic bank of ABC academic bank of credits, and are slowly incorporating the concepts of multiple entry and exits through a right credit transfer mechanism also. Friends, we heard researchers and presenters yesterday as well as today in sharing and understanding and analyzing the various aspects of students and youth movements from pre-independence time to present. In fact, that has really presented a strong foundation for the center so that we would be able to take up in a sense that the research papers presented by through keynote address as well as to valedictory address by both of the guests, both of the chief guests, as well as our panelists through panel discussion, as well as the resource persons through that talk covering students and youth movements across the state as well as across the global itself. So that has in fact presented a right logic, right philosophy for the working of this center in future as well. We are in fact going to publish the book covering the research papers presented by all during these 2 days deliberations itself. And we understand from the deliberations during conference that student movement is not just a recent phenomena, but we have examples ranging over centuries of student movements across the world. And it is to study these movements, both from India and abroad. That's what Professor Bhai Center for Studies in Students and Youth Movements have been established. Friends, we are celebrating Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav, and say as a part of this celebration, we heard the elaborative concepts about student and youth movements ranging across country in pre as well as post-independence era and their role, constructive role in nation building. So with this foundation, we would like to take our center forward with various academic programs going to be started from the month of June, July 2022 from this academic year itself. And we hope that the center will be a right platform for all researchers who would like to take up a detailed critical analysis of student and youth movements across era, across states, and across world together. So I'm sure the center will provide a right platform, will provide a right resources, and the complete support for all researchers who would like to come forward. So I thank the organizers for organizing the program in a best way. I thank the participants for being there for 2 days deliberation and having a constructive participation in the form of research paper presentations across 3 parallel sessions. I thank specifically to Professor Chakravarti, Honorable Vice Chancellor, for addressing the gathering as a part of valedictory session and gracing the occasion. Thank you. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you, Kulkarni sir, for your presidential address and for assuring that the Professor Bahar Apte Center is committed to providing researchers and academicians with all kinds of facilities in the future to research on student and youth movements in this country and abroad. We head towards the final part of today's valedictory function. I would now invite Mr. Sudhir Puranik, the Registrar of University of Mumbai, to present the vote of thanks.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Professor Valedictory Center for Studies in Students and Youth Movements, University of Mumbai, I express my gratitude towards Professor Vidyut Chakravarti, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Vishwa Bharati University, Shantiniketan, West Bengal, for his visionary thoughts and guidance as the chief guest of today's function. I thank the inspirational guiding source behind us, Professor Suhas Pednekar, the Honorable Vice Chancellor, University of Mumbai, and Professor Ravindra Kulkarni, the Honorable Pro Vice Chancellor, University of Mumbai, for their guidance in the planning and execution of this great academic exercise. I must thank all the members of Senate, Management Council, Academic Council of University of Mumbai, all members of Board of Studies of Professor Valedictory Center for Studies in Students and Youth Movements. I extend my warm regards to all the directors, deans of University of Mumbai, Principal Dr. Ajay Bhamre, the in-charge director of the center, and heads of the departments and principals of the affiliated colleges. Thanks to all teaching and non-teaching staff, all the participants and students, and of course, Mr. Nitin Arekar and the UCC team for its uninterrupted internet connectivity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Registrar Sir. And with this, we will now conclude the valedictory ceremony. Before we conclude, an announcement: the certificates of all the paper presenters and the attendees will be sent to you on your registered email IDs in the next 7 working days. I once again thank everyone for joining in this valedictory ceremony of the 2-day conference organized by Mumbai University's Professor Valedictory Center. I wish you all a very good evening. Goodbye. Namaste.